it doesn't look like Ukraine's doing a very good job over there. I mean, what has always surprised me about this ongoing reporting in the conflict, if I may just go down this little rabbit hole for a moment, it depends on where you're looking at any given moment. 30,000 people have been killed, 300,000 people have been killed, God knows how many people. It just seems to be a meat grinder slaughterhouse. And the Russians, they're making more inroads into Ukraine. Ukraine is not holding their ground. This looks like a losing proposition, which, honestly, if you start at the very beginning when Russia invaded Ukraine, absent assistance from around the globe, you would have thought Russia could have made quick work of that in a very short period of time, considering they have one of the biggest armies on the planet.
Well, if the U.S. and everybody hadn't joined, that probably would have happened. Probably by March, April, May of 2022, probably that would have happened. But there was so much weaponry just flooded into the zone, and really even from beginning, from before the initial invasion, on the Stingers and the anti-tank missiles that were sent in, all kinds of things that really impeded what the Russians did. And the Russians were exposed as having their 10 years before that, their reform, the defense reform, was mainly a shell. And they were really bad tactically, operationally, and strategically. Their overall plan was deeply flawed. Ukraine, on the other hand, was extremely courageous and willing to sacrifice anything, and fought very, very tenaciously. And that just completely upset everything the Russians were doing. But, and there's a big but, Russia is big enough to overcome and absorb that mistake. And now then 2 years later, they are doing things like I thought they were going to be able to do at the beginning with effective combined arms operations. They're in recent days, they have been showing, recent weeks and months have been showing the ability to conduct coordinated actions at the tactical level, at the city level of infantry, armor, artillery, drones, and air power, and especially that air power. They're really starting to figure out how to work air power into the ground operations, and it's showing results all over the battlefield. But the Ukraine side, look, it's always been just nonsensical to suggest that 31,000 troops in 2 years of fighting, when everybody on the Ukraine side, it highlights the fact that they have about a 5 to 10 to 1 disadvantage in firepower. And what sense does it make that the side that has a 10 times advantage in firepower is also going to have a 10 times higher casualty rate than the other side? It just doesn't make any sense at all, and it's not true.
Well, in terms of troop numbers alone, don't the Russians have an outrageous advantage? I mean, I just keep wondering how many military age folks, and of course, the definition of military age has expanded dramatically for the Ukrainians. I mean, they got anybody of any age, shouldering up a rifle and heading onto the front lines because they're running out of what traditional military age soldiers are. I mean, can they really, they, absent boots on the ground from other countries, in other words, our troops going in or Europe, NATO troops going in, they can't sustain this, can they?
No, 100% right. That is actually, there's a number of factors which make it as close to impossible as you can in human affairs, where even sometimes the unlikely does happen, but it's extremely rare when the side that has like millions more manpower from which to choose, an industrial capacity that is cranking at full steam on a large scale, when the other side doesn't have virtually any kind of military industrial capacity, at least not at scale. Artillery, air power, air defense, and engineering equipment. All of those things are to the advantage of the Russian side and growing daily. And as you pointed out at the top, Russia is methodically moving more and more to the west, and all indications indicate, to include the military intelligence from UK, that there's a big one coming probably in the May-June on top of this.
Do you see a resolution in this that involves maybe capitulation by the Ukrainians of some land? I mean, is that what we're staring at? Or is this going to be the Russians are going to continue what they're doing until they take over the entire country?
Here's where we're at right now. Ukraine, and by extension, the United States, is going to have to acknowledge ground truth reality. There will be no Ukrainian military victory, period, full stop, none. Now, once you get to that recognition, then you have to say, what's the policy? Are we going to continue to pretend like that there's going to be a victory, and that if only the Congress will give up this $60 billion, magically everything will change? Or are we going to say it's time to have a negotiated settlement? And that's what we should do. without question, because the longer you wait, the worse deal you're going to get. Now, Russia doesn't have any intention of conquering anything past the Dnieper River, really, to the west, because the intense of the hatred for Russia among the Western Ukrainians is so intense that you would have to have millions of soldiers to garrison that indefinitely, and there would always be an insurgency fight, and Russia has no interest in doing that. But on the eastern side, from the Dnieper River towards Russia, there's a number of Russian speakers. So there's those areas are not coming back. But the longer you wait, the higher the chance that Russia gets even more.
Well, and isn't it a comical reality? And I don't mean that in a legitimately laughable way, but the fact that sanctions on Russian oil, for example, have only benefited the Russians because it pushed them into the arms and the hands of all of our other quote unquote enemies or non friends, such as the Chinese, who are more than willing to buy up all the Russian oil that Russia can produce, the Turks, the folks in
Yeah,
India.
Indians, yeah.
Everybody is buying up Russia's oil. They don't care what our policies are. They need the petroleum products.
Yeah, that's right. Because this was really evident from the beginning, and it's just one of those head scratchers to me how anybody, no matter how much they may have hated Russia, would have thought this is going to work. Because oil is a global commodity. You can't just take this big chunk, the third largest producer on the planet, and somehow think that you're going to sanction that off, and the rest of the economy is going to be fine, and all these other countries who are not in our orbit are just going to oblige us and do what we ask and not buy this oil. Of course, they're going to, because if that was the case, there's not enough other oil to satisfy the appetite of the rest of the world at price, because then everything would have to skyrocket. So India is only too happy to take discounted Russian oil. China is only too happy to ignore us and to take discounted oil. So it's a big help for them. So they're cool with it as long as it goes on, because they're actually paying less than they would have without the sanctions. Meanwhile, in Europe, where the cost of getting natural gas and oil is much higher because they have to import it now. They can't get the cheap stuff from Russia. And then you have Germany in a recession while a Russian economy continues to grow. That's just self-inflicted gunshot wounds that just keep coming.
It really is. But, you can blame the self-inflicted wounds on following green policies just to start with, but we won't go down that road right now. Before we move on, because I want to get your comments on Gaza and whether it be a ceasefire and what the outcome that might be. I wanted to hear your thoughts on the domino effect. This reminds me a lot about discussions that we had during Vietnam War. We were trying to fight the Chi-Coms. We don't want them to invade, because if they invade, it's going to be another communist country, and then that one's going to bleed over to be another communist. We have to stop that from happening. A lot of people argue that we need to defend Ukraine, we need to give them all the weapons because, oh my gosh, if they take over Ukraine, well, then Poland is going to be next. What's your reaction to that argument, and do you believe it to have any merit whatsoever?
Yeah, none whatsoever. Again, full stop, no chance, zero chance. And the reason is because it's self-evident. You can see that Russia, after 2 full years of war, has gotten 17, 18% of the one country on their border with no allies, with no air force, basically, no navy, and they still can't get even to the 50% mark, at least not yet. Now, they may get there in time, but the Russians don't have the physical capacity to probably even take all of Ukraine should they want to do it. But they have no capacity. Irrespective of anything that Vladimir Putin may desire or lust after, it's irrelevant because he doesn't have the capacity to go into a 32-member NATO alliance that does have powerful air forces, naval forces, and nuclear weapons. So, I mean, you may say that Putin is evil, but you sure can't say he's stupid, and he would not attempt to do something that there is zero chance he could do. So all of that claims and threats is empty, and it's just words.
And I even don't believe Vladimir Putin wants to go down in history as the person who started World War III, which exactly
He's gone out of his way to say he doesn't want that. He said no one will win. He's emphatic about that. He said we don't want to do it, but we're not going to allow our forces to be attacked by NATO countries.
All right, pivoting over and these wonderful, wonderful comments. We are doing the Daniel Davis deep dive here on the 55 KRC Morning Show. Please search for it online. You'll enjoy his podcast. Gaza, I think it's a great illustration of how difficult it is to take over. It is a very small chunk of land. The Israeli Defense Forces are extremely well trained, and you can comment on that if you like. But I think they're worthy of respect in terms of their fighting abilities. I mean, they've been at this for a while, trying to ferret out the terrorists in Hamas in this small strip of land. They're still at it. Obviously, a lot of civilian casualties, which seems to be the real problem with people acknowledging Israel's right to defend itself and go after the murderers who attacked them last October. But they're calling for a ceasefire, and that's before Hamas has been eradicated. Seems to me you have commented before you can't kill your way into victory. And so where do you see this one going?
Yeah, yeah. The phrase I like to use is you can't kill your way to peace. You can just, if you have a well-trained armed forces and you have a significant advantage on firepower and technology over your opponent, you can just keep killing them all day long. But you don't have to look any further than our experience of 2 decades in Afghanistan, where I served twice and saw it on the ground play out, is that if you keep just killing, 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 all you're going to do is increase the amount of hatred that people have for you. And as we saw with all of the troops we kept sending into Afghanistan, the number of Taliban kept growing no matter how many of them we killed. This is 10 times worse than that because it's a much more concentrated place and the amount of civilian casualties is off the charts. So Israel is killing so many innocent people that what does anyone think that the surviving male members of all these families that lose their wives, mothers, daughters, kids are going to do next? Are they just going to say, well, because the guy who was called Hamas, he's dead, so I guess the war's over? No, they're going to keep going because the very conditions that led to the rise of Hamas in the first place are now like, supercharged because of all the destruction on the ground, the death and the casual destruction of people that the Israelis are doing. So they're building up much more animosity and much less security for themselves than they had before the 7th of October. So from an American perspective, I think it is absolutely in our interest, morally as well as strategically, to say, Israel, time to stop this nonsense. It can't succeed. You either hold your troops to the same standards we hold American troops in the identical conditions, or our weapons are going to stop. Now, that's heretical to many people probably listening to this, but it's absolutely necessary because Israel is going to harm themselves and their own future security, as well as continue to kill innocent people. And I just don't want that done in my name.
Well, we've been talking about trying to find peace in the Middle East since before I was born. Hell, for millennia, even. I mean, it's been unrest there for thousands of years. Is there any possible solution to this conflict? I mean, Hamas will still exist in one form or another, as you just explained. There are always going to be hatred toward Israel. They are viewed as interlopers and occupiers. So it doesn't sound to me like there is ever going to be peace in the Middle East.
Well, there won't be under the current dynamics to where a whole people group, the Palestinians, and there's about 5 million of them, including what's in the West Bank. There's if they don't have even a possibility of having hope for a land of their own, then there will never be any peace, not even temporally. Because you're talking about historical animosities and things that is indicative, but it is not determinative. It is possible to at least have coexistence. I won't use the word peace, but I think that coexistence is possible, but not for a generation from now. If you started doing everything right today, it's going to be a generation before you can get there because of the catastrophic level of destruction that's been put out there, and the levels of hatred are through off the charts are on both sides. Actually, there's many Israelis who are just as angry and filled with hate as those on the Palestinian side. So there is a way, but right now we're going in the opposite direction.